Welcome back to Get This Game. I'm Jake, and today we're not going to be talking about any board game in particular. We're not even going to be talking about a series of board games. We're going to be discussing some of the most iconic board game components of all time through a tier list, because people definitely still do tier lists, and they're definitely still relevant for the algorithm. Now, a few caveats here. I tried to stay away from more niche board games and stuck to a lot of board games that chances are, if you're in the hobby and are aware of the hobby, you've probably played with these components at some stage. I didn't want to get too into the weeds. There are some, less available games. For example, The Tower and Return to Dark Tower, I thought about adding to the list, but ultimately it's just not widely available, and probably not enough people have played it to truly get an appreciation from the S to F ranking. So we're going to stick with mainly components that chances are, if you've been in the board game hobby for a while, you probably know. Number two, we also aren't going to be dealing with any upgraded components here. So like the metal coins in Brass Birmingham, they're not going to be on here either. I'm talking about all of the pieces in a game that you can get right out of the retail box. Finally, no miniatures. We could do an entire list all on our own of miniature games, so I really want to aim to just kind of stick to, again, pieces that are unique, that aren't just like a super crazy monster in miniature form. It's really hard to kind of rank and compare one miniature to the next because there's just so many out there and they're all so different. Finally, there are probably some other board game components out there that you wanted to see included in this list that aren't going to be on here. And as always, it's okay. We can all, once again, cope with that together. So I'm going to switch up the camera a little bit, and then we're going to dive into these dozen board game components that I consider to be some of the most iconic of all time. Okay, so let's start off with, honestly, a really easy one, a really iconic one. We're talking about the berries in Everdell. Now, I included the berries. I didn't include the tree. A lot of people asked for the tree. They wanted the tree, but you know what? The tree, if anything, in my mind, kind of gets in the way. And something that's much more interesting to me are the berries, because you're not picking up and touching and holding the tree in Everdell. What you are doing is you're collecting those berries to probably play out some of the little woodland critters in the game, and they're very squishy and they're very tactile. And let's call out the elephant in the room. These are eatable. You definitely have thought about eating these just based on their texture and feel. So I think it's safe to say that these are going to belong in an A tier. They are not by any means S tier. They don't necessarily have a really big function in the game itself as far as I'm concerned, but they're tactile, you're picking them up, you're putting them down a lot, and they feel really satisfying and good. So we're going to keep them in A. Next up, we are going to go with just an icon of the industry. Just the standard classic Meeple. A lot of people called out Carcassonne because that was really one of the first places that the Meeple kind of first made its appearance in the world. Obviously, the cornerstone of absolute worker placement games. And in more recent years, we've seen them kind of evolve into being used in other ways, shapes, and forms. Like in Rolling Heights, for example, you're actually rolling meeples, and the way they orient and either stand up, lay on their side, or lay down impacts what you're able to do with them. Now, beyond that, they're kind of a little outdated, you could argue too, but here at Get This Game, I think we have to honor the classics and be willing to say, you know what, this has its place in the Board Game Hall of Fame of all time. So the fact that it's been able to stick around for as long as it can, this is very much a if it ain't broke, don't fix it scenario. And I'm trying to decide if that is worth an A tier. And I think it is. I think it's an A tier. And I'm waffling between A and B. I think we're going to keep it. We're going to keep it an A because people are seeing that the Meeple is willing to evolve. Like I said, with some of the unique ways that it's being used and implemented. I think I'm going to call it an A for now. Next up, another classic in the world of board gaming, the Catan Robber. I thought about including any of the settlements or roads in Catan. I thought about the cards, but I mean, you see that they've been kind of replicated across other games, and any sort of settlement kind of shape and component is very present in other games. But the Robber kind of stands on its own. It is this ever-living presence on the board that you have to kind of worry about on any given turn. Now, with that being said, beyond that, it's not very remarkable. It is just kind of there. It is the about vaguest way you can indicate and show a person. So right now I'm trying to think, like, I gave the Meeple extra points for being so iconic. With Catan kind of starting it all and starting modern board gaming, we have to give the Robber a little bit of credit for that, but beyond that, it has kind of stayed the same forever. So I'm going to go against my better judgment. I was going to give it a B, but I think I'm already being a little bit too nice. I think we're going to put the Robber at a C, and you can feel free to shoot me down or rip me apart in the comments. Next up, something a little bit more recent, a little more modern, are the chips in Splendor. Now, for the longest time, I played Splendor on BGA. Great BGA port, super simple game that you can just fit in a 20-minute game of any time. But it was only recently that I actually started playing this physically, and I think in this case, the hype is pretty real with respect to the Splendor tokens and the actual chips that you play with. They are nice and weighty. They are nice and luxe. They feel really, really good. And it's nice to be able to collect and kind of like play around with them like you would with poker chips. I will say, and you know, I might get some disagreement here, I think the printing of the actual gems onto the chips looks a little cheap. Maybe I was working and usually I'm playing with a really much older version or a kind of outdated version, but to me the kind of realistic looking gems just don't translate very well to the chips. Again, you get points for weight, you get points for the tactile feel, but again, you lose points in terms of the overall look of the chips. So I think Splendor chips are good, but they're about B tier. I think they belong in B. Next up, an even more recent option than maybe any of the others. I wasn't going to include the Honeybuzz Honey tokens, but I saw them all over TikTok, and I was like, you know what? Again, in the same way that the berries are kind of like just gummy and tactile and almost edible, I think the Honeybuzz tokens take them to a whole nother level. If you haven't played with this game or played this game physically, highly recommend that you eventually try it, whether you're trying that at a board game cafe. I do think it is worth, having on your shelf. I think it is a great game overall, but specifically the honey, little jelly bits, I don't even know what to call them. Again, it's that tactileness, it's that feel in your hands. They have a little bit of give where you can kind of squeeze them a little bit like that. Very, very good. I think this is a case where I think the game came out, I want to say in 2019, 2020. And the thing is, for me, I would say it just doesn't have the staying power yet. Honeybuzz is by no means a modern classic, so I don't know if we can really be ready to say it is the top tier of top tiers. But it's still pretty good. And if you know, you know. If you've played the game, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I think this belongs in B as well. Speaking of tactile, these were going to be coming out sooner or later. They're the tokens and tiles from Azul. Anyone, again, who knows, absolutely knows that these are a staple, probably on any board game shelf, but specifically in an abstract strategy game where you're just adding tiles to rows in front of you and a little layout on your personal board. I think I speak for everyone when I say they didn't need to go this hard, but they did. They are, again, have a nice little weight to them. They feel just really luxe in your hands. And I think compared to the Honeybuzz tokens, I would say that Azul kind of does stand that test of time. We could argue and say that it is a modern classic. And not only do they, again, feel really nice, they are intrinsic and crucial in the overall enjoyment of the game because of how they look, how colorful they are, and how beautiful they are. And I think I'm ready to give my first S tier here. The tiles in Azul, I think, deserve the S tier, the first one of the day. Again, thinking about color, thinking about the presentation on the board and how impactful they make them, and again, the quality of the components and like the actual production themselves, we're giving them the S tier. Next up, now I said in my TikTok video, if you watched it, I said no dice. We're not counting dice. Dice are dice. We just know that they have a big value in games dating all the way back to Monopoly. But I'm breaking my own rule here because I didn't mention the 20-sided die. Now, obviously, where this comes in most into play is with role-playing games, most notably Dungeons & Dragons. I'm a big Dungeons & Dragons fan. I have my own personal group that we go back to time and time again for a new campaign or continuing an old one. And I think the 20-sided die kind of revolutionizes this idea of chance and just how much variety you can pack into a single component and what you're doing with it. A 20-sided die can completely alter and change the trajectory of a campaign or a game overall. a difference between what happens when you roll a 1 versus what happens when you roll a 20 is completely in the Dungeon Master's hands. And I would say that, like, what other component or game piece makes as big of an impact based on how you use a 20-sided die and what the outcome actually is. I feel like I'm kind of skewing high here, obviously, from S through B. It is, at the end, just a die. At the end of the day, you can get really nice die, but if we're just talking straight up a standard 20-sided die, I don't think I'm ready to give it an A or an S, but I think it's worth calling it a B at this stage. Okay, I've been really kind, so let's go with a really, really bad one. This is, for those who don't know, the cup that you use to roll dice in Stone Age. Now, here's the thing about the cup is, like, on its own, it's pretty fine. Like, and it's actually kind of meant and designed and set up in a way that it makes you feel and kind of evokes that Stone Age, Neanderthal, like, old-timey feel. But if you also know anything about the Stone Age cup, you will know that it is notorious for being super smelly, of all things. I haven't smelt it myself, full disclosure. It brings a whole new term when you combine board games versus this cup. Those who smelt it dealt it, I think. So I like thinking about that. But I've heard it described as all different kinds of flavors and kind of odes to other smells. But that in and of itself makes it iconic to me, but maybe in the opposite direction. So for the smell and the fact that they really haven't, done anything to address that, maybe newer versions have, I don't know. But I think we've got our first ever in the world F tier. I think that's where this belongs. Next up, another very popular one in the comments, the eggs in Wingspan. Now, I will fully admit that I could have probably made a whole tier list of just components from Stonemaier games, Wingspan, Viticulture, Tapestry, Scythe. Any of those could have fit in, but it would have been a really boring list because I probably would have put everything at either A tier or S tier because their quality of components that they make and the things that Jamie does to put into the production of his games is stellar. So again, the most popular board game probably in the last 10 years or so. Wingspan, the eggs just are kind of the icing on the cake of an already really good game with really high production value. Could have also included the Treehouse Dice Tower in this case, but I wanted to stick to, again, more components that you kind of physically hold in your hands and play with. All that's to say, I'm beating around the bush. I think the Wingspan pieces and the Wingspan eggs in particular are S tier from the variety of colors that you get. Again, their weight and the tactile feel in their hands. How often you are manipulating and playing with them is a big factor here. They serve a purpose in terms of being placed out onto birds on the various spots in your habitats. It's S tier. I think it would be a crime to put this anywhere else than S tier. All right, let's bring it back again before we get into another Stonemaier option. I was shooketh and shocked at how many actual, kind of concrete hobby board gamers that I know suggested at least one of the components in the original kind of Monopoly setup. And I would say, like, I don't think we can pick just one necessarily. I think we got to do an all or nothing sort of thing. So, let's talk about it. Monopoly gets flack in the board game hobby for good reason. Straight up. Like, it is just not a good game, and there's really not been too many attempts at making the game better. If anything, they have only made the game worse over time. But I will give it a little bit of credit because throughout all of its history, as far back as I can remember in Monopoly, they have always done a pretty good job of, for whatever reason, committing to really high quality miniature little tokens and player icons in the game. They're metal. Again, they have a good weight to them. There is, to be fair, variety in this, but it's going to lose points in that, like, the different types of symbols don't make any sense in the actual game. Like your real estate moguls, your investors. So why am I playing as a thimble or a dog, right? So it can't go to F tier simply because Monopoly isn't a great game and it sucks and it's not fun and it's not a good design. But we're going to give it a little bit of credit in that the quality of the metal components is what it is. All that's to be said, though, thematically it doesn't make sense. Monopoly still isn't a great game, so we're going to slot that in just over here at D. Next up, let's flip it back over to another Stonemaier game, and these are the little clear beads in Viticulture. Now, I, again, kind of waffled on whether I would include this or not, but I did see some people recommend and talk about it, and I saw some people bring up a really good point. And in this list, you kind of get bonus points, for me at least, if your design of your component also serves a purpose in the game. Now, let's take a look at the Viticulture beads. These are the beads that you use to indicate when you have harvested wine. So you use them and put them over the different numbers of either white wine or red wine, or white grapes or red grapes in your little setup of your board to keep track of how much of each wine and how much that wine has aged over time. Now, this is a really ingenious move from Stonemaier once again, because rather than having to separately produce and add cost to the overall cost of the game by having red beads and white beads, by printing the different colors onto the board and just having you put a little clear bead over it, it's really, really smart, because again, you're just being able to cut back so much on the component cost of the game. Not only that, but they serve another purpose in that they're actually kind of little magnifying glasses that magnify the number underneath, so that when you look down, it actually makes the number bigger, which again, it allows you to shrink down the form factor and the size of the game itself. So got to give a lot of credit once again to Stonemaier for this. The beads in and of themselves aren't completely remarkable, but they do serve a purpose. So in what would be another kind of standard modern board game sort of situation, it gets bonus credits even though it is such a simple component. So it's not D or F. Again, it's very simple, but because of the kind of function over form in this case, we'll put it at a C. I think it belongs at a C. It kind of matches and fits along really nicely with the robber, because again, unremarkable design, but the purpose behind it is really, really cool and very, very interesting. Finally, our last component for this video is going to be another component that I honestly haven't played with. Would love to know everyone's thoughts. This is the pyramid in Camel Up. Now again, we're going to be getting some credit here for the manufacturers of the game, in that this is another component that looks really, really cool and really interesting that actually serves a function in the game, because when you click that button that you can see in the front, it is going to spit out and randomize one of the dice that you're going to use in the actual playing through of the game. So in effect, it is a dice tower that you're kind of mechanically manipulating and getting to press and kind of get some satisfaction out of. Now, with that said, I have heard mixed reviews of how well the pyramid actually works. I've seen a bunch of Board Game Geek posts that say and request and ask about replacements for the pyramid, because you know what, just because of its mechanical nature, it is probably going to break, especially with repeated plays. Even in some of the videos I watch of playthroughs of this game, or even like how to play videos, literally the person was struggling to click the button and have the dice fall out of the hole on the bottom. So in terms of functionality, I think it does lose points there once again. But again, it looks really cool on the table. It's an actual 3D pyramid that fits well with the theme. At the start of this part of the segment, I was getting ready to put it into D tier, but given that, again, it has that form factor, it looks really cool, and it is actually, again, functional, despite maybe breaking and not being the perfect mix here, we'll throw it into C as well. I think it's fair to say it's C. So there you have it. There's my final tier list of some of the most iconic board game components out there. I would love to know what you think. I'm fully ready to be harassed and abused in the comments just on how everything kind of shaped up. Maybe I skewed a little bit more positive than not. In hindsight, maybe the Azul Tiles don't belong where they are. Maybe the Meeple doesn't belong where it is, but I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Give this video a like whether you did agree with my choices or not. Would really appreciate that. I try to upload on YouTube at least once a week, but of course, if you continue to share these videos, let somebody know who likes board games about them. I'm hoping to hopefully crank out some more. And of course, you can follow me at TikTok at GetThisGame or on Instagram at GetThisBoardGame. For now, I'm Jake. This has been Get This Game, and we'll see you next time.